So hello, everyone. My name is Catherine DeVita. I'm the training coordinator for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And I welcome you to today's session, our fourth in this series on open educational resources in research data management. To give you a brief overview, the University of British Columbia, the Library Commons team has been offering an extensive selection of workshops since late 2019 via the open source GitHub platform. Using the same pedagogical approach shared with the Carpentries, all workshops are free, computationally reproducible, self-paced, and open for community reuse and adoption with appropriate licensing. So this presentation will focus on explaining the thinking and background of selecting GitHub as an instructional delivery platform, outline the variety of workshop offerings, focus on research data management content, and share the lessons learned about teaching a catalog of almost 50 workshops. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm working from Montreal, situated on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations. As we proceed with our webinar session today, it is with acknowledgement of the First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis nations and communities who have been harmed by colonial and unethical research, and of the data sovereignty and research priorities of these nations and communities. So on behalf of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, we commit to understanding and taking up our role in reducing harm and advancing reconciliation in research. I would also like to give a quick overview of our code of conduct. So the Alliance seeks to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. This means that discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform. The Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form, and harassment can be understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces the feeling of an unsafe environment. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. So we have Eugene Barsky with us. He is a research data management librarian with the UBC Library. And we will be joined asynchronously by Jeremy Buehler, who sends his regrets for today due to a family issue. So Jeremy is the data librarian with UBC Libraries, and so we'll still have a recording of his presentation today, which we're very grateful for, but he will not be joining us live. I'd also like to introduce you to our moderators. So Jen Abel, RDM librarian at the University of Calgary and co-chair of the National Training Expert Group of the Network of Experts of the Alliance. Also joined by Nick Rocklin, data science librarian at the University of Victoria Libraries, also co-chair of the National Training Expert Group, and myself. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Eugene.
We welcome you all. Great to see so many familiar names and your black Zoom windows in the chat. It's good to see you all. Thank you for joining us. I think this presentation is going to set a record for a number of acronyms in the title. I tried to put more, but I had to stop somewhere. So for those of you who are joining us and don't actually understand what we are talking about, so we are going to talk about open educational resources, that's the OER, in research data management, that's the RDM, and we are going to give an example from a University of British Columbia, that's the UBC, using a platform called GitHub. That's the quick glossary for acronyms. The presentation itself, I'm going to share the link in the chat, is in our GitHub, obviously, page. I will try to, since I was sole presenter today, I will try to watch the chat and try to answer questions, but please expect a delay. But do please follow along. The presentation is interactive. You can work with the presentation in the repository and see actually us walking the talk. Okay, so what we're planning to do today, I'm going to do a quick overview of what we plan to cover. I plan to cover. We are going to explain how we got here in the last 5 years using using our approach to teaching in the research commons, which is a unit in UBC. Um, I'm going to talk about a variety of tools we use as a package for delivering those presentations. Then I'm going to go to speak about research data management specifically and about our approach to provide the very brief, succinct workshops, 30 minutes data bites. And then I will see our lessons learned and assessment of the work we have done. So give you a kind of a life cycle of the process. I'm going, at this point of time, I'm going to put Jeremy's presentation. Jeremy unfortunately could not make it, had a family emergency. He had to leave yesterday night, but before he left, bless his heart, he pre-recorded his presentation, so we are going to play it now.
My name is Jeremy Buehler. I'm the data librarian at UBC Library Research Commons, and I regret that I'm not able to be with you today in real time, but thank you all for joining this presentation. And ordinarily, I'd encourage you to stop me with questions in the chat and that sort of thing. I trust my colleague Eugene can handle some of that if there are questions, and if this presentation is set up in a way that allows for that. I'll start by briefly introducing the UBC Library Research Commons, where Eugene and I work. It's a multidisciplinary hub that supports faculty and students through workshops and consultations that help develop research-enabling skills. Our materials are developed with an audience of graduate students and faculty members in mind primarily, but anyone's welcome to attend. The Research Commons developed out of a peer support model with many of its services offered by graduate students. Graduate academic assistants, or GAAs as I'll refer to them throughout the session, continue to be involved in many Research Commons activities. Each librarian in the Research Commons has their own area of focus. Mine is data analysis and visualization, for example, and Eugene's is research data management. Each librarian is paired with a GAA who collaborates on workshops. So in effect, within the Research Commons, we have several semi-autonomous teams that are working together towards a common goal. The result, as you can imagine, with multiple teams and quite a few people involved, is a fairly distributed development environment. In my opinion, this collaborative model has worked quite well for us, in particular for being able to incorporate the perspective, skills, and insights of GAAs who are coming to us from many different academic backgrounds. I think that's improved our content overall. But this approach also introduces some challenges, and an obvious one is that graduate student involvement usually means a higher turnover rate as students come and go. Even if some GAAs stay with the Research Commons for longer, in any given year, there's almost guaranteed to be some turnover. Onboarding new students requires coordination, and each new person brings their own skills and preferences to the table, to say nothing of the preferences and habits of the librarians that they work with. So before we had a kind of a coordinated OER vision, the Research Commons had its resources in many different formats, some stored in folders, some stored in the cloud. And we really wanted to shift that and bring a little bit more consistency to the resources that we provide. So in 2019 and 2020, there was a reorganization of the UBC Library Research Commons that led to a new vision for our workshops and supporting materials. We took inspiration from the Carpentries and developed our workshops as open educational resources, or OERs, that are freely available and published with a Creative Commons license that encourages reuse. We didn't want to lose that collaborative development model we already had, but we came up with workflows that brought more consistency to the way we present our workshops. And some of you may have already experienced this in the workshop and OER websites that the Research Commons has put out. Our goal was to do this using free and open source tools that are available to anyone regardless of library or university affiliations. And for several logistical reasons, it was easier for us to use tools that were not internal to the library, especially for onboarding collaborators who might be temporarily employed. We hoped this would lower barriers to access and remixing as well. But it also encouraged us to adopt more flexible and sustainable authoring habits. Most of our websites and presentation slides are now written in Markdown, for example, so that the content lives in relatively simple text files that can be rendered in different contexts. This slide shows the software and platforms that we adopted for developing the OERs under this vision. I want to say this particular set isn't necessarily I wouldn't say it's the only path to go with. And our choice of these was to some degree opportunistic. There was someone on our team who had already used these tools to develop workshops and knew about using GitHub Pages to publish a website. So we had some internal knowledge to build on. We use Git for version control, which means we can rewrite and update content without worrying about accidentally removing or overwriting something important, since we can always roll back to previous versions. And to some degree, that solved the problem of having, version 1, version 2, and multiple files where it was difficult to see what had changed over the years. The second item in the line there is GitHub, which is a convenient platform for collaborating and sharing content, and one that many on our team already had experience with. It's also great for publishing, and that third item there is GitHub Pages. With GitHub Pages, which is built into GitHub, we can present each repository as a standalone website at no extra cost to us. So it really helps with the distribution side of things. And then at the bottom, slide decks, like the one you see today, are developed often using Reveal.js, which makes it easy to share presentations with only a browser, as well as to integrate slides into workshop websites or to reuse the content elsewhere. The slides, like the websites, are also written in Markdown. So this list of software is by no means the only way to accomplish these tasks. But here you see some of our rationale. There are a few reasons why it was a good fit for us. The first item listed here is to strengthen the team's skills. And this is partly so we can provide better support ourselves when we're meeting with researchers. Writing in plain text files aligns with the values of flexibility, platform independence, and sustainability. It's much more likely that we'll be able to access these files or move the content into other formats easily when they're in plain text files. So it also means the content is easily remixed and repurposed. It's also a workflow that's entirely free for our use case. There's no cost to turning a repository into a public website. And perhaps most important of all in this list, these tools set us up for much better content management. So this includes ownership of material, collaboration within the Research Commons and also across the smaller teams in the Research Commons, as well as workflows that make maintenance of these sites and OERs a little bit easier and more coordinated. So in the next few slides, I want to show you what this workflow actually looks like and give you an example of how we might get from a markdown file with content through to an OER website for, in our example, one of the OERs in Eugene's RDM series. How does an author get from markdown files to published OER? The requirements for our workflow are relatively simple in terms of setup. GitHub is the only platform that's a must. Each person who's going to contribute or manage the content should have their own GitHub account. But those independent accounts are gathered within a GitHub organization, which is a structure within GitHub that makes it relatively easy to add or revoke rights to all of our repositories as collaborators come and go. All of the repositories are owned by the organization, not by individual accounts. And so that makes it also easier in cases where people leave and we don't end up with some material being locked behind an account or having to worry about sharing passwords for things. The workshop source material is written in Markdown. Now I've listed here HTML and CSS as optional because they are skills that are actually quite useful for more advanced presentation. Markdown is good to a point with presenting material, but they can provide more flexibility in how the content is presented. So those are skills that are helpful, but not required for this workflow. And the skills required for authoring content are familiarity with Markdown and GitHub, as mentioned before. That's something that everyone who is working on this should have. I think a relatively low barrier for those, but those skills aren't universal. And so getting the whole team comfortable with the tools could take a little bit of work. In addition to that basic set of authoring skills, at least one person on the team will need to understand how GitHub Pages works. So GitHub Pages, again, is that part of GitHub that allows you to take a Git repository, post it on GitHub, and render some or all of the content within that repository as a website for anyone to view. It can be just one person in the workflow who has the skills to modify that, but if you want to adjust your template to change, for example, how licensing information might be displayed or how navigation is displayed or some of the visual features or branding, that requires a little more skill with something called Jekyll themes that I'll mention just a little bit later. So let's walk through that and see what this actually looks like with an example from one of Eugene's workshops. We start with the Markdown content. And those of you who are familiar with Markdown and HTML might notice that this isn't pure Markdown. We see here there are some HTML tags as well, just helps us with the way we want to format that information on the website. And there's a link at the bottom for anyone who's using these slides later to see this file itself as it exists on GitHub. You'll recognize some similarity of the content here to the published workshop site. So that content becomes this website for a file naming OER created by Eugene and the GAs he works with. You can see there's actually a lot more going on this page than was visible in just that Markdown file. The layout is relatively simple and consistent with visual elements and navigation that are common to all Research Commons workshops, including that navigation menu on the left and the information about Creative Commons licensing down in the bottom left. So you can see also scrolling down this site, more of that content from the Markdown file represented. Each OER we publish in this way lives in its own GitHub repository in the Research Commons GitHub organization. So this screen here is a snapshot of the repository where that file naming workshop lives. And in this case, the file naming component is actually just one part or one page within the website. So at the top level within this GitHub repository, there is a content folder. And inside that content folder, were you to open it, you'd see this list of several Markdown files. I've underlined in the top the file associated with the website that we were looking at just a moment ago, but you can see there are others as well. And our repository setup is configured in a way where each one of those Markdown files is going to get generated as a website. And there's content in the file itself that indicates what that should appear as in the navigation menus and so on. So GitHub Pages uses software called Jekyll to generate websites from a repository. If that's new to you, no need to worry about it. The main idea here is that there is software behind the scenes that is applying a theme to the set of Markdown files that we feed it. So these instructions for converting the Markdown files into a website are in a Jekyll theme. And in the Research Commons workflow, we maintain a customized Jekyll theme in its own repository. So this improves consistency across our workshop sites and makes upgrades easier because every one of the OER repositories in the Research Commons points to the Jekyll theme when it gets rendered as a website. And so the instructions in the theme get applied to the content. And if we wanted to change something, let's say change an icon or the way the license is represented, all we have to do is change this theme and then regenerate the websites, and they're all going to incorporate that change. That link that tells GitHub to look at that theme when rendering our sites is established in a configuration file that exists in every repository. So you can see here in this example, we have the config file with some high-level metadata for the OER itself. There's the title to it. And that second line there indicates the remote theme that points to the location of the repository that contains our Jekyll instructions for rendering the site. The config file also contains copyright information, and we've done it this way so that the copyright information can be changed per OER. At the moment, I believe all of ours are Creative Commons attribution, but we have the flexibility to change that on a case-by-case basis. So a challenge I've alluded to before is maintaining consistency and getting everyone on board within a shared or distributed development environment, having everyone doing things roughly the same way. To help with this, the Research Commons theme repository is itself rendered as a GitHub Pages site. And within that site, there are step-by-step instructions for the workshop authors. So I won't go into the details here because mostly I'm interested in conveying the steps involved in this process and giving you a sense of how it all fits together should you wish to try something similar. But if you are interested in it, the link to this will take you to a fairly easy to follow step-by-step guide to starting from scratch and creating a brand new workshop. And this is really helpful when we're onboarding new GAAs and getting someone to build a new site, because we can just get them started with that consistent and common set of instructions. As a platform, GitHub also has affordances that help us with improving and maintaining our content. It's, I'd say, relatively easy to do content review collaboratively without stepping on each other's toes. We can use features like Git branches, for example, so that someone can be working on one part without interrupting someone else. GitHub Issues is a feature within GitHub that's designed to track software development and bug fixes, but it works just as well to keep track of suggested improvements or wish lists for our own content. So for example, if I come across something in my one of my workshops, it's like, oh, right, I want to improve this example. I might not have time to do it right now, but I can just flag that as a GitHub issue that either I or the GAA working with me can come back to at a future point. And with pull requests, we can welcome contributions from anyone who has a GitHub account and an interest in making our resources better. And we haven't had many examples of this, but we have had at least one case where a student in one of our workshops has contributed code that has been incorporated into the workshop and used in future versions. So it's a really great way to be able to encourage collaboration. So I'm getting close to the end of my presentation here, but before handing things over to Eugene, I want to share some of my own reflections about this setup. After several years working with this, does this implementation live up to the promise? And I want to qualify these comments by saying there are several small teams within the Research Commons, each one working somewhat differently. And so these are reflections from my personal experience. And I would say that some of the things I mentioned are probably less of a challenge for Eugene, who has done a great job of really maintaining his content quite focused and reiterating that content over time. So on the whole, I would say yes, and I would say yes unreservedly, that I like this setup, and I think if I were starting again, I would encourage the Research Commons to adopt something quite similar to this workflow. One of the pros is skill development. I think this is a big advantage. I had used both Git and GitHub before being involved in creating these OERs, but not enough to feel like it was part of my work. And this workflow was a nudge that increased my sophistication in some of these tools because I was using them more often, and then also sort of emboldened to use them for other purposes. I'd say it can also present a valuable learning opportunity for the GAAs we hire. And I'm not going to read through all the other pros on this list because I think I've spoken about many of them before, but I'd like to reinforce that our workflow has really delivered on many of these promises. Yeah, I'll hold there and then move over to the cautions. There are some things that I think it is important to consider. These aren't necessarily cons, but just things to keep in mind if you're moving in this direction. I think the learning curve can be steep, especially if you're interested in customizing the Jekyll template or in creating more sophisticated slides with Reveal.js. Members of the team will likely need to be well, they'll need to commit to learning some of these new tools, which can be discouragingly slow at first. I think an example is that while it's possible to author on the GitHub platform using the GUI, it's actually much more efficient to develop the skills to clone the repository locally and work within your own text editors of choice. But that is a step that does require a bit more effort. Another caution is our dependence on GitHub, which is the only software in this chain that isn't open source, despite its commitment to development of open source software. And it's possible that changes to GitHub could affect our workflow and force us to change some things. It's not something we anticipate, but a possibility to bear in mind when you're using software you don't have more control over. And my last comment is really just a reminder to check your rose-colored glasses on any new process. So any new process is going to require some upkeep. I think the workflow we use for our OERs improved consistency and access to our materials, but the collection still does need pruning and care. And I think I alluded to that a little bit earlier in saying that I particularly could invest a little bit more time in upkeep and maintenance. But I would say that for consistency of presentation and for being able to get the material out there, this workflow has been a real advantage for us. So I'm going to end my part there. Thank you again for participating in today's event. And I will pass it over to Eugene for the remainder of the presentation.
So I'm going to take us where Jeremy stopped, and we are at slide 17 if you're actually following the presentation on GitHub itself. And we are going to start talking about research data management, specifically how we use this platform to teach issues in the research data management. So I've been doing this job. I've been a librarian for 20 years now. I've been doing research data management for the last 10, 12 years. And I've experimented a lot with various approaches in the beginning. So I used a variety of approaches to teach. I used various open source softwares and not some proprietary. I use Google Slides. I use PowerPoints. I tried to use a OSF, Open Science Framework. And nothing really clicked for me because I felt that every time we were offering a session, I felt that the content is just way too much. And I think many of us on this call who do it for a living would share this sentiment. When you go to a class and you talk about research data management for 60 minutes, 70 minutes, each topic tends to swallow the previous one. When you talk about storage, and you start talking about the rule of 3 to 1, and then you switch to file naming, everybody already get overwhelmed with the stuff. So the stuff gets just forgotten. So I did not like that. And I wanted, after my last sabbatical, I wanted a drastic redesign of everything. I wanted to break things and start again. So I decided to go with kind of a Lego approach, smaller chunks that build on top of one another, but also can live independently. So I like a mosaic that I can build on top of each other, or I put it sideways. I can put it. I can take that one piece and present it in various ways. So I wanted to have a dynamic approach. And to do that, I redesigned all our teachings, and I am redesigning. It's a continuous process into a series of very, very small, very focused 30 minutes workshops. I call them data bites, where I know that many of you on this call have taken some of those. So you would be familiar with the approach. We take 10 minutes of content. We try to do 5-10 minutes of exercises, and we leave time for questions and discussions. It does generate a lot of questions at the end, so I'm pleased that we leave enough time for that. I offer them for the last year-ish. It's usually offered by a student. I will explain, but it's I try to offer it in the line share, so people who are busy with the life, like research lab managers, can actually join us for 10-15 minutes, either in person, Zoom, and talk about research data. The format, again, as Jeremy has outlined, we use a shared GitHub template that we use for more than 50 workshops. Each workshop has 2 exercises. It's mostly hands-on. And each workshop is supplemented by a one-pager. One-pager that I can give to a user and ask them for instance, embed it in their data manual if they have a data manual. When we talk about directory structures, or we talk about creating a data dictionary, something it's a kind of a lesson to go, which tends to work really well, again, in my opinion. So I'm going to show you an example of a file naming workshop. If you look at this, we are still in my GitHub presentation, right? Just to remind you, we are slide 23, but we can actually interact with the workshop within the slide. It's another beauty of GitHub, being able to put code on a page, being able to type your notes, being able to put a map and interact with it, or in this case, bring a website into the frame and interact with it without leaving the presentation. It's kind of cool. This is an example of a file naming workshop. So you will see each workshop comes with a cheat sheet that comes as one pager. If you click on it, it will take you to Open Science Framework, where I host those one pagers. There's a reason we do that. Happy to talk about the reason in the questions and answers, because it's a version control place. And unlike GitHub, I don't have to change the links. Then we introduce the content. This one, we start talking about, for instance, why file names have to be machine readable. And as we do talk about machine readable, and I explain the special characters, blah, 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 we give a first exercise when we say, okay, now you please take all those recipes and convert them to a machine readable example. So we tend to, again, I will have some lessons learned about it, but it tends to be more interactive workshops than your regular Sage on the Stage research data management presentation, when we talk for 60 minutes and things just get swallowed. We offer those workshops once a week. So we offer a lot of workshops. Once a week, we offer this short workshop. We have a cycle of those workshops. I cycle through. We have like 6 or 7 of them. So each workshop tends to be offered 3 times each term. So we tend to get a lot of people who have not reached all our workshops. They tend to take one. They get engaged, and they usually take the entire cycle. Attendance is steady. I don't teach for hundreds of people. I don't find it useful. So we open for 20 spots ish, and we tend to get 10 to 15 people attending. And it's perfect. It allows us interaction. 10, 15 people is a good enough group for us, for engaging, for doing the exercises, asking questions. It's comfortable enough. And I try to keep this group this size. But I do it by opening the workshop for 20 to 25 seats, and it's usually full in plus waitlisted. But then we only have a half the people attending, which is not unusual for library free workshops. So half the people are coming to the workshops, and we get a nice group of 10, 15 students. We do get a lot of stuff, and it's brilliant. I can see some of you here on this call, some stuff from UBC, and I appreciate it for you attending those and coming to support us in this webinar. Lab managers, grant facilitators, research coordinators, they tend to show up because at the end of the day, they run those research teams. We ask for feedback, and I will get to the feedback when I talk about assessment. I talked about Mosaic. So in some cases, researchers, profs want to take those modules and offer it in an extended way. So for instance, a researcher in medicine might ask me, can you come and talk to us about research data management? And I have actually an hour or hour and a half. Can you fill this space with the information? And I can take all those workshops, 5, 6, 7 workshops, and package them in a different ways, because if they're in GitHub, which means I can use any pieces of that content and remix them in any way, remash them. So I do everything. I do the weekly workshops for half an hour, but quite a lot workshops for specific classes or programs like geomatics and UBC. It's a program. It's like degree, and I come to their class twice a year, and I speak for an hour each time. So I actually can't cover my entire syllabus this way with all the workshops. So those tend to be grad level, while the workshops themselves, the short workshops, are usually attended by a mix of people, undergrads and staff, and some profs too. So we have a mix of people, while usually in class, we tend to do grad students. Okay, let's talk about assessment. So we do a lot of teachings. Again, many of you have attended them. I appreciate that. You provided your feedback. We'll talk about that. So we offered around the 45, 50 workshops in the last school year with more than 800 attendees. We send a survey at the end of the workshop, it's automatic survey sent by LibCal. We collect the data. I look the data every month. I work with my students. So I have 1 to 2 GIAs delivering those workshops. I actually don't deliver them. I support the chat, and I sit and watch it. And I always jump in when the questions arrive. But I do want to give an opportunity for a student, for grad student, to offer those workshops. And it's a varied success. Usually it's quite good. Sometimes they're not cooked yet, and then we have to work with the students to improve them. But overall, the satisfaction from those workshops are quite high. We have 96% satisfaction, so people are pleased with the content they get. It's quite short. They don't waste time. It's not an hour. They only come for 10, 15 minutes, get the stuff and go, especially if they have this lesson to go in the PDF. Yeah, people do suggest questions, do suggest tweaks as on GitHub issues or in person, and I implement most of them. Some of them are just too complicated, and I keep them for later. Jeremy talked about maintaining the content. It's a big issue. Once you have 50 workshops, you created them, so you have to be responsible for them. You have to own the stuff you create. So I have a yearly cycle. I spend the summer term, and I usually get a new student librarian, new GIA every summer. And I spend that opportunity to update the entire corpus of all our workshops. So everything is updated, everything is fresh on at least on a yearly basis. But again, I update the workshops on the go. If you look at the GitHub now, I will give you a link to in a sec to our workshops. You will see content is being constantly updated, but a full update, full refresh for each workshop comes every year. I ask for community feedback. You must have heard from me asking you for questions, and some profs help me with the content, especially if I come for 2 hours in the class, like geomatics. I work with them on a very specialized guides. Like if you look at in a link that I will provide in a second for our workshops, which I actually did. If you look at research data management, there's a workshop on the geospatial data deposits. That one was created in collaboration with the professors because they wanted to make sure the students know how to deposit geospatial data. Lessons learned. It is a process. I tend to mentor students a lot. So I teach in a library school. I work with students a lot. And I know that students, I don't like throwing them from the boat. And I spend every student, I spend at least 6 weeks to get them a training before they start delivering workshops. So I do 6 weeks, few hours a week, hands-on training. So we practice the content. I answer questions. They experiment. They fail. They try again, and until they feel confident with teaching the material, I don't put them on the spot. Content needs to be fresh. People do notice the date stamps. If your content is old, people will tell you. So I prefer content to be fresh, and all our content, as I said, updated yearly. So we have only half of the attendees engage in exercises. That makes sense. Some people are more engaged, some are less engaged. I don't really mind. We still have some content that they will take away, even if they don't do it hands-on. We noticed that one-page guides are very useful. And again, those one I update yearly as well. So on a yearly basis, I have a full refresh, not only for the GitHub content, but also for the standalone PDFs. We have plans for the future. I'm planning to, we have a new workshop, just released it last week. It's a data dictionary workshop. Some of you actually attended it. Thank you. Hopefully it worked for you. But next steps will be creating READMEs with Markdown, actually sit down and create a README files with a Markdown while you are looking at your data. And I'm hoping all the time, if you want to use the chat, to suggest some new workshops, new ideas. We happy to create them and share it with the community. Again, all content that we do is we walk the talk in open scholarship. All our content is free, is computationally reproducible. You can take and grab and use and reuse and remash much of it. Just don't forget to cite us. That was that, and it's perfect timing because it allows us to jump to questions.
So starting with a question from the Q&A, are the students who teach the workshops, we know UBC, well, maybe not everyone knows, but UBC has a library school program. Are the students who teach the workshops iSchool students or students from other areas, or both?
Thanks, John. So rarely we have iSchool students delivering those workshops. Very rarely. I would love to have more library school students getting the skills and feeling comfortable. And again, some of you on this call, I'm looking at your names, have been in those shoes, have worked with me, and are working in the profession. We desperate for people like that. So usually there are students from multiple disciplines. Right now, I have a student from pharmaceutical sciences, and he delivers those workshops. Before that, my previous student was from iSchool, and again, we would love to have more iSchool students, but they tend to avoid those topics, unfortunately. I can, Nick, I can see questions in the chat. Harshita asks, there are 45 workshops in my list that I shared. Those are research commons workshops. We only have around a dozen for research data management. And again, we share the same approach. If you look at any of them, they all look the same. It's the templates that Jeremy was discussing. They all look the same. They have the same field, the same license, the same delivery. So we tend to work in the same way.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for the presentation. My question is related. Do you have any insights, any ideas of what's the implementation of these people going to workshops after the workshop itself? Because, for example, in my experience, you give workshops in open science, R, programming, reproducible workflows, but then you talk to people months, years after, and they are still again with GradPath and Excel sheets, no? So the behavior towards open science really changed too much, or at least that's my impression. Do you have from your
Totally. I'm going to blow your mind now. Just to stay, leave your camera on so I can see you. I have a team. I teach in library school. On last Friday, I had researchers I asked guest speakers from a lab called Active Aging. You can actually Google them, Active Aging UBC. They came to give a guest class. They attended my workshops. They invited me in to talk they did this 1 hour mosaic of workshops built on top as well. So they were presenting the way they work with data. And every single principle I was talking about, how to name files, how to create directory structures, how to make data fair, how to speak about care principles when they work with indigenous. Every single one of them was in their life cycle. Like I cannot share them. I can actually obviously find this presentation in a second and share it with you, but it was mind-blowing. It was amazing to see how various research teams actually take that stuff, which like you, I never thought really that it will change the approach, but it actually does. It actually does. The stuff that you do, that we do, that all of you do on a daily basis actually matters. So those people who want to listen, who will want to work with you, they will. And those people who don't care, obviously, they won't care. But the stuff we do, it's not for in vain. We are making a difference, and you can see it in these grant applications. You can see how they do business. It's actually quite amazing. But thank you for asking this question.
Cool,
I
thank
have the
you.
proof for that. If somebody wants to see.
Cool, thank you.
That's great to hear, especially at this time of year when everybody's like, "Oh, we're just tired." Does it make a difference? A question in the Q&A: how do you advertise these sessions? It's amazing that you have 10 to 15 attendees for each one.
Each one every week. Yeah, for sure. We don't advertise them. We have a so we like every library we have a calendar. Um, our calendar is feeding to other calendars. So we have like we feed in the UBC calendar. Obviously, we feed into other calendars. Well, I take it back, Jen, actually. We do have a monthly newsletter in the Research Commons. When you worked for us, Jen, we had a weekly newsletter. That's what things have changed. We have a monthly newsletter or bi-monthly sometimes when we advertise those workshops, but nothing more than that. It's a word of mouth. People do find them, people do take them, they come back. Usually we'll see people coming back for the whole cycle, and I rarely, uh, I rarely have to go and make a case for those workshops. I don't really mind. They fill up, so I'm not worried about that. But of course, we will saturate it, and we will have to think about how to promote it later. But right now, in the last year, has been working just fine.
Yeah, a few things have changed since I worked in the Research Commons back in the day.
Many years have passed, yeah.
Yeah, they certainly have. How would people register for the sessions?
So registration we run a LibCal platform like most of you in the libraries. It's a system we use for registration for workshops and calendars, and we do not limit the registration to UBC people. We have community members, quite a lot of community members, including you, coming to join us. So again, it's just a form. You have to fill in your name and your email address, and off you go. That's more or less it. The most beautiful thing, and nobody asked that, is the measurability of the content, and it's really the stuff that I think a few schools have taken away. Like I think Nick, you have used the same approach in both UBC Okanagan and now in UVic with hosting those workshops in GitHub. And I think a few other schools have done that. But I've seen our content. I saw that one school translated to French, which was amazing. Thank you. I think it was Vanessa. I'm not sure if she's not all here. And there's more schools who are playing this content in variables ways. So thank you for doing that. It's really good to see. For us, it doesn't make sense for you to recreate the stuff if it already exists.
Oh, wondering what school has translated the resources into French. And I remember seeing this on
see
campus.
that school here. I think and I can't, I would never, it's not a big one, Victoria. It's not a UDM or Laval. It was a smaller school that I will not remember. But if you follow up with me by email, which I will type in this, it's actually in the presentation itself. If you follow with me by email, I will get to you right away. I have it bookmarked somewhere. I'm just not in my office right now. It's all in French.
If there's no questions coming in, I might ask one. So yeah, Eugene, as you mentioned, I've done stuff in GitHub both for UBC Okanagan and now at UVic, and with tremendous success. It is, I think, a great platform. It's open, it's flexible, but there is a barrier to entry. And I knew that when I first was presented with it. I was looking at the content and I didn't even know how to engage. And I think one of the great things that you've created is that template to walk people through that. But I'm wondering, and this is a question for you if you've seen it, or just for people out there in the chat, do people feel generally comfortable with taking that leap, or is there training, is there additional resources that we could give to other schools to help them adopt this model? Because I really do think it is, in terms of what's offered, is free, open, accessible, adaptable. It is the best platform that I think we have available to us.
Nick, you just said it. It's a learning curve. It's not an easy learning curve. You can take it in different ways. If you don't have to learn GitHub, you don't have to learn those things to be comfortable. You can reuse the templates, and then you work just in a GitHub page using HTML or Markdown. That's more or less it. Like I do that. I'm not a sophisticated user as Brilliant Jeremy is or other colleagues are, Eka and Evan and others. I'm not as sophisticated. I'm always looking for the simplest path for this to deliver my objective. So I work straight in a GitHub page, which does not require many of those learning skills, learning curve. So it depends how you want to approach it. If you have an interest, it's relatively easy to learn. If you want to go deeper, there's no end to it. But it's not, the learning curve can be broken down into a number of hills, and some of those hills are quite easy to overcome.
So seeing that there are no further questions at the moment, and that we're getting close to the top of the hour, we'll hand it back to Catherine to wrap up.
Great, thank you so much. So before we close up, I just want to let everyone know that we have the date for our next session. So Tuesday, March 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll host our next session, which will focus on considerations for creating bilingual OER resources. So if this is a series that you've enjoyed following, we've certainly loved having you here. Save this date, put it in your calendar, and an invitation will come out shortly to register for that. Otherwise, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Eugene. We thank Jeremy also for the work he's put into this, although we can't thank him here live. Thank you, Nick and Jen, for your moderation. And thank you to our two interpreters who have allowed us to have this session bilingually. Thank you, everyone. Wishing you a great day ahead. See you next time.